Welcome to the Dutch Android summer season. During this season, we host talks from both Googlers and Google developer experts. Previous time, we had a talk from Florina and Jeroen talking about paging and Android KTX. Now tonight we have two more talks. Before we start, I want to dive more into what our meetup group is. We are the Dutch Android user group, and together with Rob, Yolanda, and Josino, we're hosting monthly free meetups. If you're interested, you can join following the first link. If you're interested in joining for discussions, maybe you have questions related to Android development, or find your next job, you can follow the second link on the screen. Tonight will be Manuel Vivo from Google talking about Hilt and how to integrate Hilt into your Android app. After that, Wiebe Elsinga, developer expert for Android, will talk more about accessibility and how users interact with the different accessibility services in the Android framework. If you have any questions during the talk, you can leave them in the chat. Right after the talk, we host a short Q&A session and we can pick up the questions right away. I think we can start, and Rob will first introduce.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dion, for doing the introduction, and welcome everyone to the second episode of the Dutch Android summer seasons. So as Dion already mentioned briefly, we have Manuel Vivo here today, an Android developer relations engineer at Google. He works on app architecture, Kotlin and Code, dependency injection, and Jetpack Compose. Welcome, Manuel. Great to have you here.
Thank
How
you.
are you doing?
Thank you for having me. Yeah, I'm doing great. Thank you. What about you?
Yeah, good too. Really good. A bit hot today too, but so far surviving. So it's really nice.
Awesome.
Working from home is going well. How's that going for you, the working from home?
Yeah, pretty good. I mean, with the whole Android team, the developer relations team, we've been focused on the 11 weeks of Android. So it's been 2 months of every week a different topic. So I've been kind of involved in a couple of initiatives. So we had the Jetpack week, we had the languages week with Kotlin and coroutines, and now I think in a couple of weeks is the UI week. So we've been preparing a lot of content for you all, and so looking forward to seeing the developer community and the reactions from everyone.
Awesome. That actually sounds really exciting. Really cool stuff to go through all the topics like that.
Yeah.
That's good to hear. I think all the developers around the world will be very happy. So before we dive into your talk, which is going to be about Hilt, I was wondering, how did you become so interested in dependency injection, and how did you end up playing with Hilt?
Oh, cool. So yeah, I mean, I started playing with Hilt because it's pretty much my job. So as part of the developer relations engineering role, what we do is, apart from the outreach, as you can see me here, we deliver feedback to the engineering teams. So people working on Hilt and other libraries, we provide feedback. We listen to the community, and we try out the different APIs first, and so we consider if they are ready or not, or we should add this feature request or this another, because the community likes to do certain things. So basically we hear you, and then we provide the feedback to different teams. But then stepping a little bit back, so I started as an Android developer at Capital One in the UK, and so we started building the app from scratch. And because of that, you had to think about pretty much everything. And so I had the lack of having to be involved in absolutely everything going on in our application. And of course, the dependency injection, it's such an important topic that it's pretty much the foundation of your app. And that's probably why it's also a controversial topic for the community, because it's so important. Everyone wants to get it right and want to discuss what's the best way to do it. And that's totally valid. We are pretty happy with that. And so because of that, I started seeing the different options, beginning trying DI manually myself, then learning Dagger. As everyone, I struggled with it. I had to fight and spent a couple of months trying to see what's going on there. But hopefully, I learned all of that on my own, obviously with some resources online. And then when I joined Google, I thought, hey, this dependency injection thing, it's something that is not fully covered by the Android team, and we should step up and give recommendations, provide some guidance, And since I started at Google, that's pretty much what I did, apart from the other initiatives that you talked about, like Kotlin coroutines and Compose. But kind of like my main goal when I joined, personal goal, to be honest, was kind of bringing the AI to another level by providing guidance, code labs, and now, of course, supporting Hilt. That's been pretty much it.
That's a great introduction. Thank you so much. And I think a lot of developers like myself will be really happy to get some direction there. So Hilt is a great step in that sense.
Sure.
All right. Well, I'm not going to keep you from your talk any further. So I think from here on out, it's all you. I'll get back to you after the talk with some Q&A questions that we get from the stream. So good luck and see you then.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you so much. Cool. So yeah, let's start talking about Hilt. So Hilt is a new dependency injection library that Google released in June. And basically, as we will see, it's built on top of Dagger. And basically what it tries to do is simplifying dependency injection on Android. So the agenda we are going to see today is we're going to do a little bit of recap about why dependency injection is important and why you should use it in your applications. Then we're going to talk about Hilt. Specifically, that's the main topic of the talk. Then we're going to see components and what that means, basically, which is a dependency injection container. And then we're going to see what's going to happen in the future, what the team is planning on doing. So obviously, like we couldn't have a dependency injection talk without going through the basics. And I guess this is a good point, a touch-on point to see like everyone is on the same page. We know why this is important. Basically, a dependency injection, it's a design pattern where the classes are going to receive dependencies instead of the class creating the dependencies itself. And that's going to be beneficial in a lot of different ways. It's going to be beneficial for refactoring your application when it becomes bigger or you want to simplify it. It's going to become easier for testing as well, because you're going to be able to test your code in a more meaningful way. So dependency injection, it's a pretty old topic, and it's been surrounded by a lot of best practices. So for example, we had the separation of concerns where every class should address a separate concern, it should be in charge of something specifically, should have a responsibility, which is kind of the solid pattern as well, right? So a class should only have one reason to change. And all of that, it's being like us developers trying to create new classes to have different responsibilities, and then other classes with those dependencies. And with all of these, different classes, because now, refactoring to make everything easier, and the inversion of control principles that we also got in the past, what happens with those dependencies? How do you manage them? And basically, dependency injection is going to be mainly about this, how you manage those dependencies and what happens with them. And obviously, those should be passed into a class instead of creating them itself, as I said before. So let's see an example. Let's stop talking about the theory here. And for example, here we are going to see some code that doesn't use dependency injection. So here we are creating a music player, and we can see how let me zoom this in a little bit. But we can see here how the music player is creating their own dependencies. So it's creating their own database, it's creating their own codecs, as we are going to see here. And obviously, this has a lot of problems, right? What if you want to replace and create a new database? Or what if you want to pass a different set of codecs? It's not reusable. And that's mainly the problem of dependency injection, that you cannot reuse it. And so if you wanted to create, for example, a music player in your application, that's pretty easy because everything is hard-coded. So basically, you just instantiate it with the constructor, and then you just can call any method that it's in it. For example, player.play, whatever. So as I was saying, this has a lot of problems, like you cannot reuse it, for example, with a different database. If you had to test this, can you test it, for example, with an in-memory database? It is not possible because now you have the SQLite database hard-coded in there. And obviously, it's also difficult to refactor because you here, like whenever you first see the class, you don't see the dependencies that it might have, or you don't see any information. There's a bunch of code, not the structure, probably. So with dependency injection, instead, what we are doing is passing those dependencies into the class. So here in the constructor, what we are doing is now this class is going to receive a database, and it's going to receive a list of codecs. As I said, this is going to become reusable, it's going to be easier to refactor, etc. But now it's a little bit more complicated to instantiate. Whenever you want to create a new music player, you have to create a database codecs beforehand, and then passing those dependencies into the music player. Obviously, this requires more code, and it's more difficult to do if you have to create a music player often. And this is what is the main difference between what we call the construction logic versus the business logic. So the construction logic is what we've seen so far in the main method. I can come back here. So this is the construction logic. You have to have some logic in order to create music player, versus the business logic, which is mainly what your application is doing. It's what gives you value to your app. So basically, if we want to separate the construction logic from the business logic, for example, if you are in a building, for example, you don't want to see the cranes when you are actually living in the building. The construction happened before, and now your business logic, what happens inside the building, it's on something completely different. So you have to separate that, because if not, everything is going to be very confusing, and your code is going to get very messy. So we said before the separation of concerns and all that. So what happens here? So with dependency injection, there is going to be a class that is going to be responsible for managing those dependencies. It's going to be responsible for this construction logic. And this is basically what a dependency container is going to do. So even if you do dependency injection manually, you will have some sort of class responsible for providing objects and providing dependencies and telling your application how to build something. And for a little bit more of recap, I gave a talk with Danny Santiago about dependency injection Android, Android Developers Summit last year. Basically here also we go through different options and why dependency injection is important. So we said that it has great benefits, and it is recommended to use a dependency injection library to avoid the boilerplate. What boilerplate? So as I was saying, like now you have to manually create all the objects in order, for example, to create a music player. So a dependency injection library is going to do that for you. As we will see with Hilt, you're going to see how to build something, and then Hilt or any other dependency injection library is going to generate that code for you. You don't have to worry about it. And so in that talk, if you remember or if you watched it, we recommended Dagger as the recommended solution for Android. That's because Hilt was burning, was creating itself. And so let's see why dependency injection is hard on Android. And it's hard because the framework classes are instantiated by the SDK. So, for example, an activity, you don't own an activity, you don't create it, you cannot access its constructor. The framework is going to create it for you, and that's a problem for dependency injection. And the same for the service, the broadcast receiver, etc. Then now things are getting a little bit better. So factories, for example, for fragments were added on API 28. But that's not a realistic solution, as not everyone can afford having a minimum SDK of API 28. So what about Dagger? So we said it's the recommendation, was the recommendation in the past, but we know that, as I was mentioning before, it is hard to configure. There are hundreds of ways to do the same thing. That's why we also, the team, wanted to create a guidance to kind of lead the way and say, hey, you should be doing things in this way, because there are multiple ways to achieve the same thing. So, and that's a problem. Whenever there are a lot of ways to do the same things, people do it differently. And so whenever you go and switch from one project to other, it seems like you know nothing again. And you asked us for a better solution. So in this survey that we conduct yearly, 49% of developers wanted an easy DI solution on Android. And so what they wanted, something that is opinionated, that we make decisions for you so that the tool becomes easier, easy to set up, of course, and then let's you focus on what is important. And in dependency injection, what is important is the dependency itself, how to define or how to create an object. And that's when Hilt comes in. So Hilt is a library built on top of Dagger that we released on June. And basically, this is what it's trying to do is to standardize how to do dependency injection on Android, as we will see later. And it's built on top of Dagger, as I said. So as we will see now in a second, it also uses an annotation processors. So with annotations, you are going to tell Hilt how to do things. And that annotation processor is going to run before Daggers, and then Dagger is going to pick up code that Hilt is going to generate. And obviously, we have tooling support. So in Android Studio 4.1, we added some support for Dagger and Hilt. Like you can easily navigate where dependencies are coming from with a lot of things, are pretty good things. So I invite you to check it out. And also it comes with Android X extensions, things that Dagger didn't have. Now we'll see it's integrated with view models and Work Manager. So cool. So let's take a look at the setup. So we're going to start with the music player as we saw before, and we're going to start with something simple, and we are going to increase the complexity. So in order to use Hilt in your app, in order actually to tell Hilt how to build something in your app, you have to use this inject annotation. And you inject things, and you use this annotation in the constructor. So basically, this is telling Hilt, hey, in case you need to create a music player, here's how you do it. Basically, you can think of it as a recipe. This is telling Hilt how to build something. And now, how to enable Hilt in your application is using this Hilt Android app annotation. Basically, that's gonna trigger Hilt annotation processor. It's gonna give this application a dependency injection container, as we will see later. And that's everything, or that's all you have to do. And to enable a Hilt in Android framework classes, you have to use @Android entry point. So as we said before, you don't control how these framework dependencies are created. You don't control an activity or an app compat activity. So in order to enable Hilt in these framework classes, you have to use the @Android entry point. And again, that's also gonna create a dependency injection container, as we will see later. So now, because you cannot call the constructor, how can you pass dependencies to the activity? Basically, you just have to create variables, and those variables you annotated with the @inject annotation. This @inject annotations comes from the Dagger code as well. And so basically here, what we are saying is, hey, I want play activity to have a music player. Hilt already knows how to create a music player because it was annotated with @inject, as we saw before. And now we can call a player as if it was populated. So Hilt is going to be in charge of creating the boilerplate and setting up everything so that we just have to focus on saying these are dependencies I need, and now I just want to start executing or start with my business logic. So far we've seen Hilt Android app annotating the application at Android entry point that annotates the Android framework classes like activity or fragment, as we will see. But the music player that we saw before, it was pretty simple. It didn't have any dependencies, so that's why it was very easy to create. And now let's add a music database. So now a music database, we could think, okay, this is an interface, for example, or it's something like Room is going to create. With Room, for example, we don't own the constructor of a database created by Room. Or for example, if we had an interface, we don't control, like you cannot instantiate an interface. And for that, you need something else. And the way Hilt can know about things that you don't control, for example, the music database that is created by Room, is with modules. So basically a module, it's basically, again, it's going to be the recipe how to create things. So here we are telling Hilt how to create different objects. And so we create, for example, our data module that is going to contain the database. We annotate it with @module, and then we say, without installing, where that dependency is going to be available. So for example, because a database is something that we could access across multiple activities or services, we want to install it at the application level, at the root level of our app. And in order to tell Hilt how to create instances of different objects, it's basically with methods inside the modules. So here, basically, we are just telling Hilt, hey, whenever you need a music database, you have to run this piece of code. And basically, this method is annotated with @provides. And so it is going to execute this method whenever the dependency, the music database dependency, is required. And so before I was mentioning interfaces. So an interface, you have to give it an implementation. And instead of using provides, there is another annotation for that, which is called binds. And that's basically it. So you could think of modules as a recipe to tell Hilt, again, how to build, how to provide, how to create instances of different types. Cool. So we also saw installing. And now we're going to see the components a little bit. So before I was saying that we saw a little bit that there was an application component. And I was, across the talk, I was mentioning that a component, or there are like dependency injection containers in the activity, in the application. So we're going to see that a component, it's a dependency injection container. And what is a dependency injection container? So as I was saying in the introduction, it is going to be in charge of having the logic of how to create different types. So the component is going to have that logic that in order to create a music player, it needs to have a database and it has to have a list of codecs. And basically, this is code that you don't have to worry about, because with those annotations that we've seen before, Hilt is going to generate this code for you. You don't have to worry about it. And a component is basically built with different factories. You might be familiar with the factory pattern. It's a pretty standardized pattern in the industry. And so in order to create some objects, you can have a factory to create a database in order to create different things. And so Hilt basically creates factories for different types, and then it knows how, which factories to use where and how to make it efficient to be, as optimal as possible. And so each component is going to have logic for certain types. So for example, if you have a view model, let's move on to this. So we're going to have different components for our different Android framework classes. As I was saying, like you have the application component, the activity component. So I was saying before that, if, for example, if you had a view model for a particular screen, it doesn't make sense that that information is available at the application component because it's just needed in one specific screen. That's why that information, instead of being available in the application component or in the application dependency injection container, it's going to be just included where it's needed. For example, in an activity component or an activity retained component, which is going to survive configuration changes. For example, the music database, as we might want to reuse it or want to use it across different activities, we could put it in the application component. We could tell the application dependency container, hey, I want you to know about this. And then we have other components, for example, the service component and other components that are managed by Hilt. And what that means is that whenever you use the @Android entry point annotation, this component is going to follow the life cycle of that Android framework class. So for example, the application component, the application dependency injection container, is going to follow the life cycle of the application. It will get created once, and when the application is destroyed, it will get destroyed. So for example, let's say here, so we have our application with a container, with an application component, and then let's say that we have different activities. And so in the activity, we could inject the music database. And so if you pay attention to the tiny screen, the music database has a different reference. And so now, because we didn't tell Hilt anything, every time that a music database is required, it's going to provide a different instance. It's going to run that provides method that we had before. But sometimes we want to reuse the same instance of a type across multiple activities. For example, here, we want the music database to be the same instance because, it might have an internal state. We might want to save resources and not having to create multiple instances because it's expensive, or we have shared connections. For that, there's something called scoping. Basically, in order to tell Hilt to reuse the same instance of a type whenever it has to provide it, is also specified with annotations. So for example, in the application component, you use the @singleton because it's mainly going to act as a singleton object in your app. Because every time something is needed in the application, it's going to provide the same instance. So now if you pay attention again to the music database instances, now we are providing the same instance, is the same reference. And this is mainly called scoping, as I was saying. And scoping, it's pretty common in Android applications, and you might do it even in your app without a dependency injection. And so, because you could scope to different levels, every component has a different annotation. So for example, we have the @singleton annotation, as we were saying, for the application component, and then the activity scoped annotation for the activity component, for example. I know that people sometimes struggle with scoping. That's why I wrote a blog post about scoping recently. So if you go to my Medium account, you will see that I explain more about scoping in Android and in Hilt in particular. So check it out if you're interested. Cool. So far we've seen that now with at Android entry point, we can get dependencies. We can get dependencies provided by Hilt very easily. So we have the application component, activity component, and some Android framework classes. But what happens for classes that are not part of the framework and that we might want to get something out of Hilt with them? And that's where entry points come in. So entry points are used to access the dependency graph, to access the specific dependency injection container and grab and retrieve types from it, basically. So imagine we have a content provider. I know it's 2020 and talking about content providers is a bit weird, but assume you have this in your application. And content provider, by the way, is not directly supported by Hilt. We don't have a content provider component. And this is because the content provider lifecycle is a bit weird, and sometimes it could be called the onCreate method can be called before the application's onCreate method. That's why we weren't able to fully support it directly. So because it is not supported, you have to, if you wanted to get instances from Hilt, you will have to do it manually. And basically, let's say that we want the music database in our content provider because we want to export playlist or whatever. So basically, what we need to do is create an entry point. And that entry point is, as I was saying, the way to retrieve things from Hilt. So basically, you annotate an interface with an entry point, and then with uninstalling. Here you are saying from where do you want to get those dependencies. And in this case, because we want the database, I want to get an instance of the database from the application component. And here inside the interface, we create methods from when or what types do we need. So in this case, because we need the music database, we just put it in the method and that's it. And then in order to get access to that entry point from Hilt, there are some methods, helper methods to do that. So here we call entry point accessors from an application. We pass the application context, for example, the instance of the class of that interface, and with that, it will give you an interface. It will basically create an implementation for you, and then from the entry point you can get music database, and now you will get the same database that's being shared by Hilt to all the activities, etc. So basically, entry points, use it whenever you don't have access to Hilt directly. Cool. So changing topics, I said before that Hilt also supports Android X extensions. Basically, it comes with extensions for Android X, sorry. So we saw that it works perfectly with Android framework classes using the @Android entry point annotation. But we also want Hilt to be able to work nicely with the rest of the ecosystem. So we launched it with extensions for View Model and Work Manager. And if you worked with them, you know that they're difficult to create. Sometimes you might need, for example, for let's see the view model example, you need to use a factory and the view model.factory, and then use the view model providers in order to get stuff from there. Basically, with Hilt, you just annotate your view model with @viewModelInject, and you don't have to do anything else. You might have some dependencies in your view model. As you can see, it also works with saved state handle, and that specific dependency needs to be annotated with assisted. And then you can have your other dependencies, for example, a database that we've been using across the talk. And that's it. You don't have to do anything else, to be honest. So now in your play activity that is annotated with a tangent endpoint because it needs to know about Hilt, now you can access and retrieve your view model as you would do normally. For example, we can use the KDX extensions here by view models, and that's it. You will get an instance of the view model. So something to clarify is that these AndroidX extensions are, for example, the view model inject annotations are part of a different AndroidX library. That's because we didn't want it. We didn't want to bundle it inside the Hilt code base because not everyone uses these extensions. So go see the documentation because everything's there. Cool. Let's talk about testing. So we said before that one of the main benefits of dependency injection is testing. And it was surprising how, for example, Dagger, like doing testing with Dagger was a little bit difficult. And it was very surprising for me because, it's supposed to do, to make testing easier, but it wasn't in fact. And now Hilt really makes a difference. And we're gonna see how easy this is to do with Hilt. So let's take a step back. Let's start with manual, no manual dependency injection, for example, manual dependency injection. So for example, if you wanted to test music player, here you would have to create, because we are using dependency injection, now we can pass in whatever we want to the music player. So in our test, basically, what we want to pass is a in-memory database. So basically here, what is happening is that now we have to exercise the dependency graph ourselves. So now we have to create the dependencies that we avoided before in production code. In test, now we have to create them manually and pass them into the music player that we want to create. And that's also a little bit tiring if you have to do that for every test. Music player here is fine. We just have one dependency. But imagine if a class had, 3, 4 dependencies, 20 dependencies. And what if each dependency has another 20 transitive dependencies? I mean, you don't have to do everything on your own. At some point, you start creating fakes, you start creating mocks, just to make everything a little bit easier. But what if you could avoid all of that? Like at some point, of course, you need fakes. But what if you could exercise the majority of the dependency graph with Hilt? That's basically what we are going to do. We are going to use Hilt to create this business logic, or this construction logic for us, even in tests. So your test needs to be annotated with Hilt Android test, and it has to have a rule. So here you can include the Hilt Android rule, which is going to manage all the components state that we saw before, and it's going to perform the injection in your test. And now, if we want to test music player, we just inject it. We don't have to do anything else. I mean, that's everything we have to do. In order to populate this field, we have to call rule.inject. And basically here, we say player.play, whatever, and we assert that it was working as before. So basically, again, we avoided having to create that dependency graph ourselves by hand. But you might be wondering, hey, there is a problem here. Where is the in-memory database? Is that being used? Because we didn't say anything to Hilt. Now this guy is using what it used to be using in production, which was the real SQLite room database. How can we tell Hilt to forget about it and then use something else? Basically, we have APIs for that. So in this case, because the Hilt, the database was in a module, we could say, hey, I want to uninstall it. Like, forget about information, forget about that recipe. I'm going to give you a new way to build a database. And basically, you just create another module inside the test. I mean, you can have it inside the test to apply this information to this specific test, Or you could take this module out of in your Android test folder or whatever, and then have it there that is going to apply to every single test in your app. And basically here we are just creating a new module, we call it test module, and then we tell it, hey, in order to provide this database, use the in-memory database as we have it before. And that's it, you don't have to do anything else. You can, it now is going to use the new information, the new in-memory database that we set in test. And then because Hilt, we said before that application using Hilt needs to be annotated with at Hilt Android app. In order to use a different application in tests, we have to specify that with an Android JUnit runner. So basically, we create a new runner like this, and we pass in the Hilt test application. And you specify that in your instrumentation runner, and you are good to go. You don't have to do anything else. Cool, so there are more testing annotations than this. So we said Hilt Android test to annotate your test and install modules to make Hilt forget information about some bindings and recipes. And then also have bind value and custom theme application just for more flexibility. But those are pretty advanced topics. So if you're interested, go check out the testing documentation. There you go. And then some testing tips. So if you're familiar with Dagger, you might be saying, hey, I don't want to create a lot of modules because now I have to include them in different components. You don't have to worry about that. So you can place the dependencies that you want to replace in their own modules. Creating modules is very cheap. It's a few lines of code, and you can replace them whenever you want. And also, if you have like really big applications, probably you can, as a tip, is creating small test apps that cover specific areas of your app, and that's going to make everything easier as well for manual testing. Cool. So we said, let's talk about migration, because last year we recommended you to use Dagger in your application, but now we come up with Hilt. So what's going on? So the good thing is that vanilla Dagger, that is Dagger 2 basically, and Dagger Android can work with Hilt. And you can have them, both of them working hand by hand. You can have some parts in Hilt, some parts in Dagger. They can communicate perfectly, all good. And also we have some migration APIs to make things a little bit easier. For example, if you have your own scopes and your own naming, you can create aliases to link them together. And for more information, there is this comprehensive migration guide that if you're interested, please check it out. So what's next? This is coming to an end. So basically, right now, because as we were seeing, the components are usually related to Android. So we have the application component, activity component. Hilt at the moment is shipped as an AAR, which means that it cannot be used in Java only or Kotlin only modules, Gradle modules. So the team is working on trying to make Hilt accessible outside Android Gradle modules, so that, for example, if you have your Kotlin only module, you could use certain annotations to be able to provide information to Hilt. Assisted injection as well, we are working on bringing that into Hilt and Dagger. So we are not only committed to support Hilt, but also Dagger. As I was saying before, Hilt is built on top of Dagger. So if we improve Dagger, we improve Hilt, and vice versa. Well, not vice versa, but like we are committed to support Dagger as well, trying to make things easier, because at some point, if you have a really complex application, you might need to use Dagger at certain points. So with assisted injection, mainly what this means is that sometimes in order to create an object, you need runtime dependencies. For example, in your view model, you need an ID which is passed as a parameter in your fragment. You need something at runtime. So assisted injection is going to help you do that. So we are working on that, trying to bring that in and make it work with Dagger and Hilt. More Android X integration. So for example, we are looking and seeing how we could integrate the navigation library with Hilt and make it easier for everyone. And Hilt is in alpha. And so we would like you to try it out, give us feedback, feature requests if you think something is missing. And we really want you to use it. And tell us like how we are doing and how we can improve it. So in order to do this, you want to try it out. So you have the Hilt Android docs. These docs are for beginners and for like more, user-friendly documentation. Whereas the Hilt technical docs assume a little bit knowledge of Dagger, and it's going to be very much technical with why we made certain decisions, etc. And then if you want to file bugs or feature requests, you can use the Dagger repo in that link. And we have even more resources for you. So you have available 2 code labs. So how to use Hilt in your Android app, like an app using a service locator, how we use Hilt and integrate Hilt into that app. And then if like another code lab, which is migrating from Dagger to Hilt, as it might be the case for many people. And as I was saying in the blog post, so for example, how to add custom components, like if you have a component that you want in your hierarchy, and for example, the component doesn't really need to follow the lifecycle of the activity or the application, how to create a custom component, and then how to add it to the Hilt hierarchy. And here, for example, what I use in this blog post is a user component, like a dependency injection container that needs to follow the user lifecycle in your application. And then we have another blog post for how we migrated the Google I/O application to Hilt, and scoping in Android and Hilt that I mentioned previously. And code samples. I don't want you to bore you a lot with so many links, but we migrated the Google I/O app. We have TV from Chris Baines. We have Catch Up from Zach Swears. Those samples are online, and check it out if you want to see and are interested in how Hilt works. And thank you so much for your time. Now, questions. Looking forward to them.
Yes, thank you so much. I think people should start seeing me again as well.
Yeah, sorry if it's been boring. It was 35 minutes and it wasn't too bad.
No, it's really interesting. Really nice introduction to Hilt, and yeah, definitely. I'm personally a fan of Coin as like a service locator because it's so easy to create the view models. But you showed how easy it is with Hilt, so it looks really interesting. I might have to dive into that.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. Let me see if there's some questions. I think I saw some pop up. So Andrei Roska asked a question, which I asked him to elaborate a bit as well. So he says, Hilt was made to make Dagger setup simple for the classic Android activity fragment view flow, but Jetpack Compose does direct render to the canvas, no fragment or view. Is Jetpack Compose close to plain Java, as close to plain Java, so it can just use Dagger as is, or the place where Dagger was born, or Jetpack Compose has new? Yeah, basically the question is, will Hilt work with Jetpack Compose as is, or will we need a Hilt Compose at some point? I think that's what he's trying to get at.
Yeah, definitely, totally valid the question. So at the moment, Compose actually needs a host activity or fragment in order to render UI. So I've seen people like injecting stuff at the activity level or the fragment level, and then passing those dependencies in the functions, in the composable functions. Obviously, that's not ideal. Like when Compose gets better, like we are gonna see that probably those classes are gonna, disappear. And also, what is interesting there is that you might want to have dependency in a specific composable. You don't want to, for example, if you have a dependency in the middle of the tree, you don't want to pass it across 8 composable functions just to hit that part of your UI, and that's totally valid. So at the moment, Hilt as it is cannot be used with Compose unless you inject stuff in the activity or the fragment level. But it is true that we are trying to work on that. So we are going to see like what options do we have and see how we can use Hilt in Compose in a better way. That's something that the team has in mind.
Cool. So definitely something you're aware of. Nice to hear. Then the next question by Jolanda Verhoef, one of the other organizers. You mentioned to create multiple small apps when you're testing. Can you give an example how you would go about that.
Yeah, so that's kind of we used to do that, like the team usually does it as well in different applications, internal applications. And basically it's, for example, like if you modularized your application and let's say you have certain apps in different modules, if, for example, if you want to isolate certain parts of your app, for example, the onboarding experience or the registration, login, onboarding experience before going into the landing page, like you could, isolate that bit and then trying to make it more efficient for like better compilation time, better, easier of testing, and all of that is available with Hilt. Like Hilt helps you doing that because everything is a component. So you were saying before the coin and the service locator. With coin, for example, that would be more difficult because you have like a unique global object where all the dependencies are retrieved from. But with Hilt, like you have like containers that you can isolate more easily.
Cool. Okay, yeah, that should be really helpful. Nice, it's good. There's a lot of questions coming in. So Wiebe Elsinga, our next speaker, he's asking, why did you choose the name Hilt?
So we had a lot of names on the table, but Hilt basically it's what you use to hold a dagger, and because Hilt is supposed to make a dagger easier, that's the way like you could like easily handle dagger.
Gotcha, nice reference. Then there's Saik Kaski. He says, awesome talk, so compliments there. And is Hilt the last dependency injection framework I need to learn? Fair question.
Time will tell. It's tough to say, but what we can say is that the team is fully committed to Hilt, and so also Hilt and Dagger. And that's because it's a tool that we use internally in our Google products. And because of that, if we want our products to succeed, obviously we want to make Hilt better as well. And that's what Google and Android are promoting at the moment. And yeah.
Fingers crossed. All right. Let me see. Sviatoslav Chachenko, he's asking how much compilation overhead does Hilt have?
Yeah, so as I was saying, it's an annotation processor. And with Java, the times are pretty good. But with Kotlin, kind of the main bottleneck at the moment is KAPT, which we know that it takes, it's a bottleneck in Android development time in other libraries, not only in Hilt, but other libraries as well. So specifically, like for example, on top of Dagger doesn't add a lot of time. So it's just a brief layer making things easier on top of Dagger. So if you migrate from Dagger to Hilt, you won't see a lot of increase in your build time. But obviously, like if you use Hilt from scratch, you will see an increase a little bit.
I think a related question then is, does Hilt support incremental annotation processing?
It does support it, but then like even though like KAPT in Kotlin is still an issue, and the team is also thinking, not thinking but considering moving to KSP, which is like a Kotlin symbol processing bit, which is supposed to make things easier.
All right. Let's see, there's more question. Andre Roska has another question. In Kotlin, the module is on a singleton object. Scope is created when wrapped in a component, but the module itself can be called from anywhere. Is there a reason why modules are objects?
Yeah, this is just to make it more efficient. So here, like it doesn't matter if you put it as a class, but Hilt is gonna get that information. Like what is important there is that object or class is public, because Hilt needs to know about it, and it just makes it object so that Hilt is gonna be more efficient with that. But probably like array is gonna do it for you, so it doesn't really matter.
Cool. I get one question by Yolanda. Let me see. Would you currently advise the developers of a big app, say more than 30 screens, to start migrating right now?
Migrating from Dagger or Dagger Android? Because if it's Dagger Android, I will definitely recommend migrating to Hilt. If it's Dagger, it depends on the team and what they think of Dagger and what they think of Hilt and how Hilt maps to the components that they have already available. So if the components perfectly map one to each other, I would migrate 100%. And I think one of the benefits of Hilt as well is that I was saying before in the introduction that Dagger was difficult because there was many ways to do the same thing. So if you want from one project to another and both projects use Dagger, like the setup and everything could be done in a completely different way. So in another project, you might think that you don't know Dagger anymore. But with Hilt, that's different because we are standardizing how to do DI. And so if you migrate to Hilt, it is possible that other people, newcomers to your project, will understand better your DI setup and how to use DI in your project and in your app. So it's up to the team.
Yeah, that sounds super valuable. Cool. Then Chetna Noy, he's asking, how would Hilt work in a multi-module project?
Yeah, so it works in the same way. So if it's in a multi-module project, you just use the same annotations and it will get picked up automatically by Hilt. If you use dynamic feature modules, because the dependencies, the way the modules depend on each other is inverted, then you will need to use some manual, you will need to fall back to Dagger basically, because we have the same problems with annotation processors and dynamic feature modules. For example, with the navigation library, safe arcs don't work in there either because of that limitation we have. And so we are trying to see how to make that better. But at the moment, you have to fall back to Dagger in dynamic feature modules only in that case.
Yeah, okay, clear. One more question I see in by Shervin Shirai. How can we enforce scoping in Hilt? Let's say I want certain activities to have access to the injected dependency, but not the other activities. Is that possible?
Yeah, so you would do that using, how is this called? So other annotations, forgot the name of them. Qualifiers, that's it. So you would use it with qualifiers, but because they all access the same definition of the activity component, so they have different instances, but the same definition. And those types could be, for example, available in activity A and B. But if you want to control if they are used or not, like you can use qualifiers to do that, just to make it more like type safe in that way.
Yeah. All right. I think that actually answers all the questions already. That's
nice.
Great stuff. Let me give it a couple of seconds to see if anything comes in, but I think we're all set up. So with that, yeah, I want to thank you so much for joining us. It was really, really good having you, and great talk again. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me. I had so much fun. I hope people learned a lot. And if you want, you have any questions, you can reach me out on Twitter or wherever. Like my Twitter handle is Manuel Vicnt. Or Manuel Vivo, you can find it there. I will be listening to your feedback. If you have any questions, please shout.
Perfect. We'll make a link that in the description as well. Thanks again. See you around.
Thank you for having me. Bye.
Bye. All right, welcome back, everyone. Hope you had a good break. Grab a drink, ready for the second part of this Dutch Android summer season. And what a second part it is! We have Wiebe Elsinga here, who is a Google developer expert for Android and product strategy. And he's a lead developer at Igenic. And another important fact is that he's also an ex-Dutch Android user group organizer.
Well,
So hell yeah, that's actually well. First of all, how are you doing?
doing well. A little bit hot on this summer evening, but apart from that, I'm doing fine.
Nice. Working from home, all going well. Managing there.
Yeah, Corona can't hold me back.
Nice. That's what we like to hear. Great to have you here. And yeah, I mentioned you are an ex-organizer, so maybe we can get some feedback here. How do you think we're all doing? Are we keeping it going the way you hoped, or are you ready to step in again and take over?
No, I'm actually really proud of what you're doing. Content-wise, your organization or organizing skills are excellent, and I transitioned from organizer to active participant in the Dutch Android user group. So I'm still part of the Dutch Android user group, but you're doing an awesome job.
Nice. Great to hear and great to be around and have you available for this kind of stuff. So today you'll be talking about A11Y accessibility. Unfortunately, it's often a topic that's kind of neglected when it's just not the priority when people are building app and trying to ship fast. How did you become so interested in this topic?
Oh, that's a funny story. Well, it's not really that funny. I think it was 4 years ago. During one of the talks, I normally give talks at conferences as well. And at the end of the conference, somebody came up to me and started talking about that most of the apps aren't really accessible for people with a disability. Actually, he was blind himself and had a wonderful evening in Barcelona with him, talking about what we're missing as a developer to get a good insight on accessibility. And because I love user experience, that triggered me to find out more.
Nice. That's a great story, actually.
Yeah.
Cool.
A little bit sad, though.
A little bit sad, yeah, that we aren't all doing our best to make apps as accessible as we should, but he managed to turn you, and hopefully you'll be able to turn all of us, and things will be better from here on out. Fingers crossed. Right, with that, I'm just gonna give the word to you, and you can tell us all about it. I'm looking forward.
Thank you. Before I get started, it's always funny. I'm a developer. I'm not really an expert in design, or I don't have a disability besides my eyes a little bit. But I think it's important as a developer to know actually all the possibilities we can reach, or all the users we can reach, or we currently aren't reaching. So I want to talk a bit about accessibility, not accessibility per se, but the fact that we aren't reaching so many different types of users with our apps, it's quite worrying. A good example is, I hope you never seen this, but it's actually a lot of blind people, or people with visually impaired, people with no motorized skills, and even with psychological disabilities use our apps. And before I continue, I have a disclaimer. Although we are, or I'm talking to you from developer to developer, there won't be so much code in there, because I want to show you good insight on the whole problem. There is some code, don't worry, but just to be safe, this is my disclaimer. So if we look at different kinds of disabilities, or people with a disability using the apps, I try to figure out what are the main areas that they're struggling in. And for me, and I've been doing this for quite some years, found out there's three major areas. So mobility, vision, and cognition. Basically, mobility in the broader sense, people aren't really handy with their hands, eyes, motorized skills to actually control or use their mobile phone, but they are. So what are they struggling with? Vision. A good example is people with color blindness. People are blind, that are blind, that don't see well, that have epileptic. And the other group is cognition. Basically means is they get quite easily triggered, quite easily frustrated, or quite easily distracted by most of the clutter. I'll give you an example later. So how do these users with these kinds of disabilities or challenges interact with you for your app? Not with you, but with your app. So Google, but also iOS, is using the accessibility services. Basically, it's a privileged service that runs on your mobile phone that helps interpret the information on the screen to that service or to that device. And to give you a good example on the different devices, for the different groups I just mentioned, so we have a switch device. If you have trouble, it's a let me show you, sort of this device, but then with two. So you can only click on one of the two, but you can navigate within your mobile app or within the Android device. You have D-pad. Basically, it's a sort of a joystick. You go up, down, left, and right. These days, you can control your mobile and the navigation and apps using your voice. We'll give a demonstration later. And you have physical keyboards, and it's not the small keyboards you're used to maybe on your old phones, but it's actually a big keyboard for people that are motorly skilled. If you look at vision, people have trouble distinguishing different colors if you're colorblind, but there are different kind of nuances if you work with contrast and colors. So you can set and you can change the different colors and contrasts on your mobile phone using these services. Also, people change text and display as well. For instance, older people like to have big letters or a big display. Obviously, you can't grow the display on an actual visual device, but there are some devices that you can use to have a bigger screen. And obviously, software-wise, you can change the text as well. I'll show you later. And last one is screen readers. The most famous one in Android is TalkBack, and we'll show you a demonstration as well. And with that, I want to show you a demonstration. So let's see if it works. Where is my device? Oh. It's always technical difficulties. You always have to happen. So this is my device, not important. So let me show you a bunch. Do you see it actually working, or is it lacking? It's lacking. Well, one moment. Yes. No, it's not working. So I will show you later and get back to the presentation. Technical difficulties, always fun. So what can you do as a developer within your application to help accessorize or accessibility, improve the accessibility? Well, first of all, again, based on those three pillars, mobility, vision, and cognition, let's have a look at some of the changes you can do. First of all, it's really important to move unimportant information. It's always important to not give too much information to a user. Not that it's a secret, but unclutter stuff, and it's quite handy. For instance, if we have let's say, I hate the word, a splash screen, if you use TalkBack, you focus on the background image first because it's on top of the whole hierarchy. But we don't want to do that. It doesn't give any additional information. So add is not important for your accessibility. These are things I hope most developers already do, so it's not really that big of a shock. But running through your application and seeing what is and what isn't important is a valuable feature as a developer, not only for accessibility, but in general. Do we serve the correct information to the user without cluttering with a bunch of nonsense information? The other way is if we support focus navigation. Basically, you're telling people that use a D-pad or a keyboard what the next step will be. So, for instance, in TalkBack, the next item you want to have is the second. For instance, in a list, is after the first row, the second row. Or if you have a constraint library, constraint layout or a linear layout, and the next one should be a different one, define those. I must say, there is one small catch. Accessibility focus doesn't always mean having the focus navigation. So it doesn't mean for, 80% of, if you define next focus up and down for a D-pad, it will work. But if you have a screen reader, it might be handy to actually have multiple accessibility rules in there to use accessibility travels before and after. So defining, you have to distinguish those two way of using focus. If you do, I prefer or I encourage you to at least test with a physical device like a Switch. It's quite hard to get one keyboard, but at least the D-pad, and the D-pad you can configure in the Android emulator as well. So go out and play with that one as well. So if you look at vision, we have to provide people with visually impaired or color blindness meaningful information, meaning not only by color. What I mean is, for instance, for us that are visual not impaired or challenged, red means danger, means wrong, means alert, means error. People that are colorblind don't see that, or can't distinguish based on that color. So the color for them doesn't have meaning. So give them an option for meaningful information. And some other ways, you group different kind of information together to have it say what it is or give it meaning. For instance, I have a list, and we have John Doe, age 21, etc. If I use TalkBack, I will go to the different elements. Let's say a text view or a combined view or constraint view. It doesn't give any meaning. What I actually want is something. I want to select a row, and I want to have TalkBack saying, well, John Doe, age 21. This is much more meaningful for people and can go much faster to the actual information on your screen. And a good example for this, so let's say I have a constraint library or a constraint layout with two text views. Basically, I only need to add focusable stru to have it as a single group. Not that much additional work, but it does help a lot for people that are visually impaired or having trouble or using TalkBack for whatever reason there is. Another way we can improve within our app is naming. Obviously, most of you will probably already are already using content description for images, basically telling a user that can't see what the actual content is. But for me, it helped to have an actual non-image example. Let's say I have a text input field. The hint is easy, but if I click on it, I want to have it maintain the information about that input. In this case, entering your email. So a good example is obviously we use hint, but use for label as well. So it contains the actual information. It might be silly, it might be a struggle to have it within your UI, or your designer may not be happy, but it is actually adding additional content and stays and has the focus of that user. Another thing I saw with quite a bunch of applications is what I call empty state, meaning let's say I have a row and it can do two things. It can ignore, or it can delete, or I can add that specific contact. If I just add ignore if I just use the default content description for that element, let's say it's a delete or an ignore, it doesn't add anything specific when I select a different contact. Much nicer would be it's actually enriched that content description with valuable information. If it's a row and you want to ignore somebody, John Doe, do it and mention that in the content description as well. Another example is sometimes it's quite hard. We customize or we create our custom components. And if the app is running and somebody is visually impaired, and if you use TalkBack, focusing on that specific element doesn't give any additional information on what it is. I can see it's a sort of a button, but TalkBack just say skip. Well, skip doesn't mean anything in the whole context. So obviously we add a content description to a specific part, and all of a sudden I saw a bunch of people changing this, and TalkBack is telling me skip button, because button is the identifier of that specific element. No, all I want is the element, what it does, skip, and what type it is, and it's button. And these are some kind of small tweaks you can normally do within your application. Run TalkBack, run through your app and see what it tells you. Another issue is, do we need to change accessibility that much to have a complete different experience? Because people use their app in a different way. My answer, and every time I've seen this when they do a different experience, is no, because you want consistency with your app, but also your consistency with your flow of within your application. That doesn't mean that you can help or add them additionally. So like getting back to the whole screen where there's a skip button. So normally when TalkBack has a focus on that button, it says skip, kind of element, button, and it says double tap to activate. That's the action the element will do if you interact with it. But in this case, do I want to say double tap to activate? Sure, the user knows. Well, we can improve on that. We can change this by double tap to skip registration. This will add so much additional value. And this can be done by adding the accessibility delegate, and you can define the different kind of actions, elements, names. In this case, I added the action, the click action, and what it actually will do is skip registration. Or you can even go further. If somebody clicked on it, you can have talkback say registration skipped. So give them meaningful additional information without breaking the whole experience, the same experience for people that aren't visually impaired. As I mentioned, cognition basically it triggers people mind, and that's not good. So always avoid complex gestures. Basically, it doesn't give that big of a meaning if you have a compact gesture. And overall, avoid clutter. That's a general assumption. Less is more. It's always hard to do less is more, but it's really valuable. So if you look at some tooling, there are some things you can use to actually measure, improve, or test your accessibility improvements. Obviously, there's the accessibility scanner, and I will try to hook up later because I'm having technical difficulties. These days, you have the pre-launch report on Google Play. Basically, before you publish, and during publish, and after publish, there is a report generated giving you different gestures on how to improve accessibility, from using different color schemes to unnamed elements. Go have a look at that. I'm always surprised in how many different things still can be found. Obviously, we can, because we're using Android Studio or IntelliJ, Lint is really helpful in giving you some insights, not only about those content description, but also color schemes these days. And we're elaborating on multiple Lint rules. There are some bug reports and some new feature reports that they will expand on Lint for that. You can use Espresso. Espresso has a bunch of accessibility test support methods you can use. Obviously, if you use Robo Electric, they also do it. And there's the accessibility test framework if you want to go all out. But for me, I always do manual testing as well. You can't maintain so many different ways to actually use your code without manually testing, eating your own dog food. Just go out, install TalkBack, install accessibility, and try. And if you're really up for the challenge, what I normally do is I close my eyes and I use TalkBack so I can actually have that same experience. So now let's see if I can demonstrate again. Yes. No. Let me hook up. Maybe that helps. So let's start. You have the settings, and within settings you have the accessibility options. I downloaded the accessibility scanner, the voice access. Voice access basically means I'm having difficulties. Sorry for that. And now I broke my code. Yes. No. Yes. Voice control basically means you can control the whole device by using your voice. TalkBack, I will give a demonstration. No. And now I broke my cable. Well, I'm sorry guys. It's not gonna happen. So And that is a wrap for me.
And other than that, some really great tips in there, like the red signaling a warning. It's super obvious to me, and yeah, then you think about it 1 second, like, yeah, if someone doesn't follow, it doesn't make sense at all. And just these small changes that you mentioned that can have such a big impact, like the focusable flag or the content description with the context. It never even occurred to me to programmatically set the content, but now you mention it's like, yeah, that makes total sense and would
It's not that
help
hard.
so much.
It's not that hard. You before we start, you said, well, I'm not doing that much, but it doesn't have that much of an impact for you as a developer to add some kind of small rules. But for somebody that has a visual, let's say, color blindness or doesn't see well, those are really valuable add-ons for you.
Yeah, exactly. I can imagine she'd really be doing more with that.
Okay, well, as I mentioned before, there are some examples and some videos online as well. But if you want to see an actual user test with somebody that has difficulty with vision and is using an app, Yolanda has a nice tweet sent out, I think it was last week, where they show you how a person with visual disability is using the Corona Melder app.
Yeah, definitely can recommend that too. Looks really cool and yeah, shows you how much impact you can have by implementing this stuff.
Yeah. And if you
All
want
right,
to
let's see.
do yourself, close your eyes, start TalkBack, and run through your app. It's that easy.
It's that easy, yeah. It just takes a minute and you'll know what's up, huh? Let's see if we have some questions in the meantime. Let's go. Edgar, he is asking, with respect to mobility, in general, is it better to have actions like the navigation and the buttons in reach of one thumb, like the lower left or right of the screen, or do you spread them out over the whole screen? I guess to be able to make them bigger. Any experience you could share?
Depends on the functionality. Sometimes it's quite handy to have it on the lower left of the screen, but because you don't want to trigger navigation that often, you can do it on top. So basically there's a structure within a screen. If you do it often and much, it has to be in the lower part because it's near your thumb. And if it's something flowable, like going back, the back button, it should be near the top because you don't do that much. But it's a valuable structure within the flow.
Clear. He also was asking if you have any extra link rules. So we have the content description one if it's missing, but do you use any specific other ones that you can share?
Yes, and I will share them online. I think tomorrow I can export them. Yeah.
Nice. We'll keep an eye out for that then. And Dennis Anderson is asking, how would you know if what you are doing coding is the right or correct thing to help users that have a disability, if you don't have the disability yourself. So how do you test it as a regular, someone without disabilities?
Okay, well, it's for me it's an obvious answer. Yes, I'm not planning to have a disability to try the app, but it's the same if you have a banking app. That doesn't mean that you have to be rich to actually test the app. Give it to your mother and close your eyes and start TalkBack. There's no right and wrong in this case, because you will add additional aid. It doesn't mean that you're going to take away or break something. It's all to do with adding to a smoother experience, so don't be afraid to try. If you're really comfortable, the Dutch Blind Foundation can gladly test apps as well. There's a platform for that as well. But try it yourself. Close your eyes, give TalkBack a try. Does this answer properly?
Yeah, I think so. Sounds easy enough. Just give it a go, and like you said, every little bit seems to help already. Like starting at the content description and picking it up from there. Any other questions? Let's see. No. Yeah, maybe you can help me with this one. So Andra is asking, did the A11Y know how to make TV UIs easier to plan/develop?
Can you repeat that again? What Andre said?
Yeah, I'm a little bit confused by the question myself as well, so I'm hoping you can help me debug this one. But did the accessibility know how to make TV UIs easier to plan/develop?
No.
Yeah. No, I can't. There's no follow-up on that one, so I can't. Andre, if you're still there, please elaborate on your question, and we'll dive into it a bit further. But
or leave a note in the Dutch Android user group Slack, and gladly answer that one as well.
That's great. Then I think Dennis has another question. Have you ever specifically had a user complain in the Play Store about the accessibility of your app?
Yes.
Maybe a
yes.
interesting one.
For multiple projects. So it's not only a single project. And it was valuable. We didn't take in consideration the way, for this instance, we showed an alert dialog, and it was screwing up for TalkBack because of you have multiple layers. So we had an alert dialog, and if you close that, there is a snack bar coming in. Snack bar is quite tricky to have it right with TalkBack. So she pointed it out, and we got in contact with her, and she actually helped us test an application. Yeah.
Oh, that's really cool. You actually got in touch and managed to fix it together then. Nice. What are the Saikaski is asking, what are the best examples for good accessibility apps in the wild? Do you have any great examples for us? Corona Melder, of course.
Can I name this? Yeah, sure. I think for me personally, Schiphol is a good app as well. They set out to be one of the user-friendliest airport app out there, and they really focus on that one. So it works quite well. The KLM one does it also really well. And I will keep it with that.
Nice. I have a look out for that then. All right. I think that's it for the questions for now. Let me double check. Yeah, I think that should be it. So with that, I want to thank you again for being here and teaching us a bit about accessibility. It was great having you, and well, see you around at a future meetup. As far as I'm concerned.
And I will record a demo as well. So what technology wasn't working for me today, so I will put it on YouTube as well and share it with Dutch Android User Group Slack.
Nice, that's great. So find the Slack URL somewhere down here and make sure you check that out.
Right.
All right.
And have a great
Thank you so
summer.
much. Yeah, will do. You too.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.